Numerous reports indicate that manufacturing has emerged as the favorite target of ransomware groups and hackers. In response, a new report from Industrial Media discusses the evolution of industrial cybersecurity, its current state, and the tactics hackers are using, including phishing schemes, malware, and ransomware attacks. It also details solutions in arming manufacturers with the knowledge and resources needed to win more fights on this highly complex and ultra-competitive battlefield. Download the industrial sector's new battlefield by going to manufacturing.net/cyber. Hi, I'm Jeff Franke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Vulnerabilities across the cybersecurity landscape are obviously trending in an upward direction, and perhaps most concerning, however, is the number of 0 and 1 day vulnerabilities being uncovered in key industrial control systems by many of the sector's leading providers of software, automation, and system integration services. These vulnerabilities not only open the door for potential attacks, but lend credence to other cybersecurity challenges, such as patching, proper segmentation strategies, and trying to accommodate the potential downtime associated with identifying and rectifying these embedded problems. Our guest for today's episode promises to offer a unique perspective on these challenges and potential solutions. It's now my pleasure to welcome Constantine Antoniou, Cybersecurity Business Consultant in Schneider Electric's global cybersecurity solutions and services business, to the program. Constantine, thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to Security Breach. Right before I came on here, I got another bulletin from CISA talking about a new exploit they found dealing with PLCs and wastewater management. And it just kind of illustrates how as we have more connected devices, more connected points within the industrial control system, it opens us up to more vulnerabilities and potentially more soft spots for attacks. So maybe just to kick things off, you can offer a little bit of your perspective in terms of what does this expanded attack surface mean in terms of different trends that you might be seeing in terms of where people need to look to help them better defend their enterprise or different attacks you're seeing?
Right. Well, a bit about my background is I used to be in industrial design at the beginning of my career. So I did a bit about 7 years of sort of advanced metering design. And we thought about all this stuff back then in the 90s and the early 2000s. But nobody offered a integrated encryption stack that you could put into your embedded program. Very few companies were going to try to develop one of those from scratch, right? And what a lot of people don't realize, when these vulnerabilities get posted, they often go, how could this have happened? And you kind of go, well, I was in those design rooms, I can tell you how it happened. Requirements, people put together a project. And if a client is not asking for something, it doesn't get developed, right? Yeah. And, I guess one place I always end up going back to is when it comes to an OT environment, especially an industrial, process network of any kind. It's a great idea that it would have been developed, with one master design team that figured out how all the pieces would fit together. But we all know that it's often like ad hoc, a new design project. It's based on budgets, capital, and stuff like that. So a lot of choices that got made, even depending on how old your plant is, say 30 years ago, 25 years ago, can often be this tech debt that's sort of haunting the plant, right? And everybody knows about it when you talk to the lead OT person. So, I think when it comes to, say, PLCs, a lot of design choices got made that were in the land of like, well, of course it's going to be air gapped, and this is going to be true, and that's going to be true. And then some bright spark young guy throws a Zigbee device on the side of that thing and breaks the Purdue model. And everyone goes, okay, cool. But it didn't get the review or seemed like a good idea at the time. And, unfortunately, it starts as simple math, and then it turns into exponential math, right? As the number of devices go up and the number of potential vulnerabilities, firmware revisions between different parts. Sometimes you have a PLC system that has an expansion card that has its own firmware. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question as clearly, but the issue is that, the threat level or the risk level is sort of exponential at this point, and there are ways to, make sure you're paying attention to it, but it's unfortunately requires quite a bit of investment to sort of clear out that tech debt, right?
Yeah. So how are we doing things? You've got a unique perspective there at Schneider Electric with the number of different industrial enterprises that you're working with, starting on a component level and sort of growing up from there. Is the industrial sector getting better in terms of understanding some of these deficiencies, understanding how this combination of legacy systems with new IoT-focused technologies is coming together? How are we doing there, or are we just constantly chasing the bad guys right now?
Yeah, I feel like it was one of the things I learned when I first studied more about cyber back in the early, late 90s. Kind of like, yeah, the problem is we always have a moving target, right? As we get better at defense, they get better at attack. And I've just as I've seen it develop, it depends on the organization and to some extent to the industry, right? When you say you're talking to something like life sciences companies or semiconductor companies, which I focus a lot on the life sciences side, but I used to do work with semis back in the day, and they're focused on like anything that gets in the way of uptime, right? Is how they feel about it. And I've found the shift in the last few years, especially, is they know the problem. They know they've got to deal with it. They might not understand the risk level, and they might not have quite allocated the budgets that they need, the capital projects to solve it. So I think one of the things one of the shifts I'm starting to see is a more of an understanding that yes, you can have a CTO, you can have a CIO. You probably need something that's not necessarily a COTO, but somebody who is responsible from a high level for communicating that level of risk to the board or to the CEO, to the C-suite, right? And so I would still call it the maturity levels are very mixed, and it depends even within an industry. We'll talk to some clients who are they're very humble about, we really, I often say this, the person responsible for OT security, often it's the seventh hat that got thrown at that person, late in the game. And they're like, I know I should be doing something about cyber. And there's a lot of anxiety and hand wringing about it. And that's sort of how we engage, right? We sort of go, okay, well, let's look at what you have, first of all. One of the biggest things I think probably everybody in this world talks about is trying to figure out the maturity model for that client. Like, where are you in the spectrum and how can we help? We've worked with clients that are so switched on that it's impressive. Like, some of their team are at the level of some of our team, and we go, all right. And you'd think that would mean that we wouldn't have an engagement there, but no, they still often need our help to go, well, we just don't have the staff, and we're not going to hire 20 full-time engineers. We need to clear out some of this tech debt with your help by building a program of some kind, like some kind of cybersecurity program with us. And then the idea being that their team learns and grows and learns and grows. And eventually maybe we get to the point. Like we said, you never get to the point where you're probably like, we've got it all solved. There will never be another cybersecurity issue. Yeah. I love the idea, but you can get to the point where you're just down to a sort of a dull roar. When we say the ultimate version is getting to that point where we talk about the IT OT integration that you're probably, everyone talks about. It's a real thing. I have seen clients that have done it well. They have a great security operations center that sits in the IT and the enterprise layer. And when they get alerts, they don't punish the OT team with, you guys are screwing up. They have a relationship with the OT leads. They have a conversation. They have playbooks. I call it the hallowed ground, because very few companies get to this point, right? And we all know, you probably had whole podcasts on the OT IT divide, I'm sure, but whenever I give a talk, I can always tell who's responsible for either side on the leadership side, because the heads are, they're just, there's usually 10 people in the audience in different spots. They're just nodding their heads vigorously when I talk about it. So
absolutely. There's a lot of great stuff to unpack there, kind of starting with a couple of things that you mentioned. A lot of that, and we've heard this before, when it comes to sort of championing cybersecurity and establishing it as a priority in the enterprise, it starts from the top. It really has. You really need to get buy-in at the top level. So what I would ask there, and I know there's no specific answer to this, but for those enterprises who have gotten that sooner, what does it take, other than getting hit by a ransomware attack or some other big attack that gets a bunch of headlines, to sort of drive that enthusiasm or passion for cybersecurity within an enterprise? Is it just a CEO who gets it, or is there more that can be done sort of from the ground level up to try to gain that support?
Well, I think sometimes there's a bit of luck that there's a CTO or a CIO that really cares about the holistic aspect and isn't not a great way to put it, but like, is it more like tribal about like, well, I got to protect my IT team, what we need to do, and those guys down there are causing us like, it's more framing, right? It's part of the core issue is language, right? And sometimes you get lucky where, for whatever reason, this OT person and this IT person, they have great chemistry as people. They like each other, and they go, how can we figure this out? Let's mend fences and fix it. And I think what is the hardest thing for the C-level is that when they find out how costly it is to fix these problems, sometimes they just don't want to hear it, right? It depends on the maturity of that organization. So we have a lot of stories where they go, look, we know we need to do this, but I don't have the headcount. I don't have, I'm under pressure for uptime. We all know availability is the key heuristic they're measuring OT by, right? Most plants they know the number. If you're down for 24 hours, this is how much money you're costing us. And that's what I think in a mature organization, there's a lot of transparency, right? They reach the point where they go, you can tell me, I want to hear the bad news. I'm not, I mean, seeing this in, organizations where a leader surrounds themselves with yes men or yes people. And they're never going to find out that OT needs, $3 million to basically over the next 2 years to make a dent in the tech debt, but it's there's a lot of things that go into why an organization can or cannot. I've seen every version of it. And when I walk into one, I had one where they actually said, no, we're really looking into that. We've actually done a weekend getaway type with the heads of IT, the heads of OT team building exercise to really make sure they can become great collaborators. And I was like, I was at the bow. I was like, I have not heard. That's how it's done. I think the soft factor, the human factor stuff, figuring out how do we make these people have all the horses pulling the cart in the same direction. Sort of what I say.
No, it's interesting, and it's tough too to sometimes get buy-in on that investment because you're basically investing in a bunch of technology in hopes that something doesn't happen. There's not the typical ROI that you have with operational technology in terms of saving time, getting more product out the door, whatever the case may be. So it can be a very difficult dynamic. I think the other thing
I use the sorry, cut you off. You kind of use it's like what makes a time travel movie so exciting is that this person does this sacrifice, tells everybody, and then nobody knows because they fixed the timeline, and it's kind of like that, right? It's preventative work is so, for lack of a better way to put it, so unsexy. And when nothing happens, I use Y2K as a good example. You know how many people when Y2K happened, all this money got spent on fixing these problems. And then everybody, a ton of people, not everybody, went after on January 2nd. What a bust. Nothing happened. They got us all revved up. And I kind of go, yeah, because we did the work. I mean, there were definitely contractors who milked that and charged clients money, and they didn't do anything. But I knew a lot of people who were very involved in serious mitigation work, and they were doing their jobs well. So anyway, sorry, I cut you off there. Go ahead.
No. Great example. And where I was going to go next is you brought up an interesting dynamic there with like the semiconductor folks and how worried they are about downtime and what it costs. The problem that we now have is hackers know all of these things as well, whether it's a food processing facility, consumer electronics, wastewater, utilities, whatever the case is, the hackers understand all those business dynamics as well. So one of the lines that I try to walk here is to have these conversations and get the word out. But what I found is if you start scaring people too much, it's a lot easier to ignore the message. What advice or what's worked for Schneider or for you in your previous roles in terms of having this conversation without freaking people out to the point where they just want to put their head in the sand, essentially?
Yeah, I agree completely. Like I never lead with anxiety because, look, there are a lot of cases where we may get to your site and on our assessment and find out that you have the best physical security in the game. And yes, you're not doing this, and this right from a classical, like, here's how you should approach IEC 62443. But because your physical security in this spot is so strong, or because your protocols are so well followed, we'll give you a thumbs up here and say, you should look at this, you should look at that. But let's figure out a way to build a program. And it's generally what my engagements tend to be more about building this, helping them build improve their posture, but how do you build an internal program that's going to be successful, right? How do you create the roles, I think we have one client that's pretty switched on life sciences that I'm working with a lot, that was very keen to, they've got this, person who came on who's really kind of a game-changing kind of person. And so he's been pushing into their organization, like, hey, we want to do something big here. And so he was able to use his political capital, secure funding and all that stuff. That's pretty rare. Someone who's willing to put their neck out for it, it makes it tough for that person, because then they're on the hook for all the deliverables. Now, how do you illustrate that you've done, like you said, you've prevented problems that maybe never have happened for that client? Fortunately, within that industry, everybody has now talked about it enough that they all know that it's not just a sales anxiety gimmick that's being used to make people spend money. It's like, no, these when these payouts happen, they're significant, right? And I often say, with insurance, it was something. I've told this story many times, but there was years ago, I got some upgrade coupons for a airline flight, and when I tried to use it at the gate, the guy smiled and he said, "I'm sorry, my friend. The big print giveth, and the small print taketh away." And it was like, it said I had upgrades, but it clearly in the fine print I didn't qualify for the upgrade in this situation, right? And I laughed and I said, "Well, thanks for that, at least." And that was funny. But I'm hearing this story a lot with insurance, right? If you haven't done your homework on your cyber insurance, it's when, we've all been in that situation where we have an insurance claim and you find out that you were not covered in this specific rare situation that happened to apply to you. And you kind of go, I wonder how many of these were in the fine print, right? How covered am I really? And so there's a lot of homework you have to do, I think, when it comes to, I know we weren't talking about insurance, but it's a big part of the discussion. We've had clients engage with us because their insurance company was switched on enough to warn them to go, like, by the way, if you want to be covered the way you want to be covered, this is the premium. And it was so much more money that they were like, now we understand that it's worth it to spend the money so that we can even prove to our insurance company that, okay, we've got this covered, but cover us for this, and this, So I'm sure you've heard that a lot too. So.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because the insurance can actually be some sort of this false sense of security as well. People think they have the insurance policy in place, so they're fine. Having to go that next step and validate it is extremely helpful on a number of different levels. I mean, not only are you ensuring that the insurance policy is going to cover you if you are hit, but you've got all these other things in place that make it that much harder for the hacker to get at what they're trying to get to. So it's a double-edged win there. I mean, you talk about some of the positive things that can help us sleep at night. I mean, those are some of the advancements or developments on the positive side that have been made. So it's good to hear. From day one, when everybody, Chat GPT last summer, it was just in everybody's mind, and it really started the ball rolling in terms of people's anxiety, just, like a tidal wave just coming over and washing over a bunch of stuff. And I always felt like, well, if the bad guys can use it, so can the good guys. And in a lot of instances, I think especially from a red team perspective, in terms of quality controls, of whether it's a product that you're rolling out or just for your own network, there's a lot of benefits to AI. And I think you probably see some of those same things too. So I'd love to get your perspective there on, we know what the bad guys can do with it, but what is, in your opinion, some of the positive elements of AI that we can use from a cybersecurity perspective to strengthen our defense?
Well, as an engineer, I have to start with, I'm not an AI expert. I've studied it with great interest for the last, really, people have been talking about it for 20, 25 years, really, maybe more, but in earnest. And then it got, this conversations got more serious about a decade ago, or I knew enough people working in it and talking about machine learning and all that stuff all the time. But you're right, that sort of, oh crap moment of like, this is a really cool tool. What does this mean for my job? What does this mean for my future? What does this mean for, like you say, once we start generating ideas on what it means? From the defense side, I would believe that similarly, you could develop something that would look at the same idea, would look at a PCAP file that you captured on your own network. I think a lot of the, I'm not saying it's using AI, but a lot of the threat detection tools and the asset discovery tools now are very good at passively listening and, figuring out who's talking, what firmware revision they have, how to ask non-invasive queries that, don't flood the network or affect OT assets in the same way that other ones do. So I do think there's great potential for that. I mean, we all know that it's very expensive to actually build a great AI system. And so it's just kind of curious to see. It was one of the plus sides of the other side of AI is that, if it ever got to a point where building an AI network didn't require a giant data footprint or like massive amounts of processing power. I mean, when you heard how much money they spend to just do in energy alone to train, ChatGPT 4 or whatever, right? And you kind of go, right. And if you're in the know in this world, in the data center world, everyone is building. People are building data centers everywhere. So I think, not to get all wonky on it, but the regulation is going to be extremely important, right? On how if there's a way. I mean, one of my concerns is if the tech gets developed without any kind of watermark or whatever, so you never really quite know whether you're dealing with human intelligence or artificial intelligence. I feel like it's already integrated into so many things. For years, people use the word AI just to mean really good software, and it wasn't really truly AI, right? We use AI insights, and we all know 10 years ago people said that they were using AI insights. They weren't really using true what we're seeing now in ChatGPT or language models. But yeah, I think it's like anything. The human brain is wired to talk about the threat and negativity. Unfortunately, it's how our news cycle works. That's why there's no great successful network that's all about, hey, let's talk about the good things, right? Those are really fringe Instagram pages, right? They're not going to make a fortune out of that. People don't tune into that the same way. And as a result, like shows like the Black Mirror that kind of, I think are somehow like they're actually really good because they're a warning. They're like, hey, here's where we could go. I mean, that's what art is for, right? To go, here's where we could go if we're not careful. Hopefully enough designers watch those shows and go, okay, I ethically need to think about this, right?
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that's happening at every level, especially when you talk to Silicon Valley, definitely has a I got to become the next unicorn kind of motive, right? I want my boat. I want my, that kind of stuff. But I do think then in those discussions, what gets forgotten is that there are a lot of good people in the industry who want to do good things and want to build good things. And, hopefully we have more white hats than black hats. There was one book I read on the sort of this ransomware hunter team that you probably heard about it. And they were all like basically crowdsourced, like people who just wanted to help, who weren't making tons of money, really altruistic, great. These are the people we need, right? All throughout the US. And it was cool to watch because these people could easily just flip and go, well, I don't care about any of that stuff. And I'm going to go try to make as much money as possible. You do have to have a certain kind of mindset to be that person. And unfortunately, there's a lot less of those people actually than we're led to believe. I found generally in my travels, you get talking to anybody, they're like, oh, I would never do that. Like, because, never mind criminal penalties. Just who do you think you are as a person, right? Are you helping or are you hurting? So anyway, that's more a philosophical answer, but I do think there's a lot to be optimistic about, but we just have to do the homework to make sure that we're limiting the damages that threat actors can create.
No, I mean, there's a couple topics there. We could go on forever in the own podcast. I mean, whenever you want to talk about Black Mirror, I'm open because that is an amazing show, and I ended up watching the episode and then thinking about it for half an hour afterwards in terms of what it could all mean or whatever you want to say. It's interesting too with AI in the industrial sector. We've had machine learning in place for quite a while. Now that's not AI, but it should at least lay a foundation for us for understanding how to implement a lot of that technology in a very helpful manner. And I think that's what people sometimes forget as well, and sort of their panic on either to use or defend against it. We've got a working foundation that we can rely on there. It is interesting. One of the things you mentioned earlier too, I'd like to get your thoughts on is when you talked about once companies start looking at the investment they need to make in terms of really shoring up their cyber defenses, they'll see a manpower issue. Now, we have a skills gap throughout manufacturing at every level, but one of the ones that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, is OT and cybersecurity specifically. What have you seen in organizations that have been able to at least try to address this concern? I don't know if anybody's got it down 100%, but have you seen certain tactics or practices, whether it's finding people from the outside, training from within, that have helped some of these organizations address that better, I guess, than others have?
Yeah, I think what's really stressful for organizations is that if you hire, say, somebody fresh out of school, right, they need mentorship. And if you don't even have the mentor, in our team, we're fortunate. We have a number of what we call unicorns. These people who have 25 to 40 years of industrial automation experience that also happen to be they understand IT, they understand OT, and they care. Like they really, we have a number of them, and they love the work. Like they love to help. They love to we work with clients with global footprints and stuff like that. So part of it is if you don't have any kind of brain trust in your organization in this world, it's really hard to gain any traction because, well, what do? You try to find, do you even know how to look for one of these unicorns? And do you use a recruiting firm or do you, and I think that's actually how a lot of our engagements happen. People realize, oh, we actually tried to look and now we realize how this skills gap is a real thing and we can't find people. And, it is very tricky. And that skills gap, I think, is like anything you may see. I've seen a lot of people, you're right, not in OT. People talk about just cybersecurity, period, that there's half the number of bodies for the number of open recs, right? Open jobs. And you kind of go, that bears out. Now, when you find a young engineer these days, what benefits for us is that we can get them into our stable, so to speak, by saying you're also going to get a lot of mentorship here. You're not going to be thrown to the wolves on your own. We're going to make sure that you learn how to do OT cybersecurity at a program level, and that attracts a lot of talent. So, and beyond that, we just have a lot of networks. People know people, and we and inevitably you're going to lose some team members. You're going to have team members that go to a shiny new startup that offers them a bunch of money and I get it. Like you got to go do that. If that's what you need to do. We found at Schneider, inevitably people come back. I'm one of those people too. I've done startups myself, and I've come back to Schneider because it's a very good company to work for. And if you've got a good boss, it's even better, right? But it's good to be part of something bigger. There's a lot more resources you can use. When I did my startup, they always say you're chief cook and bottle washer, right? So when you're a young engineer looking for a career, we've got a great team. I really like the people I work with a lot too. So and then where we can't help, where it's like, okay, I see what you're asking for, and like certain areas we'll go, well, we don't really have. We could probably staff somebody up to do that very specific type of that standard you're interested in. But we've got a couple of people who know that standard, but we wouldn't position ourselves as experts in that standard. If you're interested in us learning about it with you, that's not always the best, but sometimes that's the best option they have. And they go, no, we definitely want to partner with you. So yeah, it's there's really hundreds of different versions of how that conversation goes. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting, and maybe, I don't know how you'd feel about this, but I think what we really have is a lack of awareness. I think when people look at cybersecurity in the industrial sector, they don't understand the dynamics as thoroughly, nor could they. If you haven't been in it, you don't understand how far-reaching it is. Again, the bad guys do. They understand what it means to turn off some of those PLCs and the impact it can have. But I think that's part of the message and part of having this type of conversation where we talk more about all these issues and how far-reaching it is and the impact that young people can have when it comes to taking a career in the industrial sector and especially in cybersecurity. I mean, you're literally protecting almost everything we use on a day-to-day basis, from the water we drink to the food we eat to the clothes we put on and the cars we drive. So it's really interesting how IoT has expanded all of this and really, I think, opened up a lot of opportunities, hopefully, for the industrial sector to attract some of the best and brightest down the road.
I think you're right. I think you're right. We haven't done a great job. I mean, I started in a company that happened to do high-end metering, right? And we were purchased by Schneider like in 2005. So I worked for them for the first 10 years of my career. I don't know if I had, there's a serendipity to it all, right? I don't know if there happened to be another local company or I got really excited. For a while I worked for Bell Northern Research, which then became Nortel. And there was a way, if somebody had courted me a little harder over there, maybe that's the direction I want to be in telecom now, right? So there is a roll the dice aspect to it, like who just, the random luck of life. But I also think it's a bit of a personality type. Like the industrial automation is, I used to joke when I was doing the fixer work I talked about earlier. I was like, I think there's something wrong with me because I like this. I like this going out to help thing, and it's really stressful and it's really hard, and there's a lot of people who are upset, and usually the team, the client, whatever it is, in different companies I worked for over the years. But you do get an enormous amount of satisfaction out of the part that, like, hey, you know what, we showed up, we struggled, we built new understandings, and then we executed, and now that's a reference client, or now we are building the next phase of the project, because that's all any client ever wants, is we want to be able to feel that our investments and our efforts are being respected, and that you're actually moving the ball forward, and you're not just trying to extract money out of our organization, right? And so yeah, to go back to the original point, I think there's an adventure aspect to it, and you do get to travel a lot, and you do get to see the world, and it is, you get privy to a lot of information that you have to, keep your mouth shut about. If you get to the level where you get, security clearances and stuff like that, which we have a number of folks on our team that are, then that's a whole different level, and it's pretty cool stuff. Forget about the movies, man. You're actually doing it, right? So,
no, it's interesting you bring that up about some of the information. I know I was coming back from a trade show, and I was sitting next to a guy who knew actually how they made the Fritos, cheese Fritos. He said that was the most incredible thing coming off the production line. So he knew the secret to cheesy Fritos. So you never know.
Yeah, but he couldn't tell you because he'd have to kill you, right?
Exactly.
Right. I think it's a very seriously protected trade secret, right? But no, it's true. And I in my travels, I've pretty much been inside. I'm a serious infrastructure geek. Like, just how anything ever gets made, I'm always kind of astounded. And even when your iPhone arrives in that box, and you go like, oh, these people made this decision about this box, and this, like, how many people were involved in this, and this was manufactured with elements from all over the different parts of the planet that came to a factory and then ended up in this thing to make a device that does something. So, like, when you're traveling, and I've been inside, I was in New York City for a long time, and I was working primarily in infrastructure. So I was inside the rail system, the power system, the water system, and if you're a geek, then that kind of stuff's pretty fascinating, right? It's not like I'm talking about it at cocktail parties. People's eyes go glossy pretty quickly when you start talking about infrastructure, right? Which is also part of the problem, right? This is why infrastructure doesn't get funded as well, because it doesn't win elections, right? To go, well, we're going to do the bloody-minded work of actually rebuilding something cool that was built half a century or a century ago. We're going to spend the money to make it modern. Other countries are a little better than that, better at that, I think, than the U.S. You look at certain parts of Europe and stuff, right? And you kind of go, okay, they get it. But that's more, I think it's a culture. I think in America, we don't talk about nerdy stuff as openly as we should, right? It's like, all right, nerd, keep that to yourself. And we're like, well, that's why we have podcasts like this for those of us who care, right? Those of us who want to know. I watch tons of infrastructure videos on just giant construction videos, and kind of blow my mind, because I'm like, I can't believe we can do this as a species. It's amazing.
No, I'm with you there. I get into that stuff as well. Constantine, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate all the time you shared with us here. Kind of wrapping things up, looking at things from both in terms of maybe threats that you see on the horizon or some of the positive developments. What do you think are some of the bigger trends that we're going to experience for industrial cybersecurity over maybe the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, I think the big, not to get back to anxiety, but the thing that's one of the more terrifying parts for me has been the development of ransomware as a service, and how it's gained such traction. Similar to what I said earlier about AI, once the skill set, like most things were solved in the world by it just being really hard to do. And the easier it gets for a threat actor to buy like a cottage industry, like it went from a cottage industry to a big industry. And as we all know, inside the world, the dirty secret of cyber attacks is that the ransoms, even when said they're not paid, are often paid. So they are incredibly well funded, right? And the better we know this, we all know this, their maturity is increasing, right? And there are a lot of organizations that hire a third-party firm to handle that. We have ways to decrypt and get you the key, but all that company does, and this is now pretty out in the open, is negotiate directly with it's a third part. Like, it gives the corporation arm's length to say, we paid this service to get the decryption key. We believe they did their job the way they said they were, which means no ransom was paid, but it was paid. So I think that the biggest threats are that the people without a lot of know-how are getting more ability to ransomware. And one of the challenges with ransomware as a service is that if they didn't do it right and there's an error with the encryption key, you can pay the ransom and get an encryption key that doesn't really,
Yeah.
decrypt, right? And it's the same reason why ransom movies, any movie about ransoms or kidnapping, are so compelling. As soon as I hear about it, I just start biting my nails. When I heard about what MGM was going through, I just could only imagine what they were going through. And then, and there's, of course, because they're this big, powerful organization, there's all these people posting Instagram videos going, like basically, which was the whole point of the reputational damage part, right? Like,
Yeah.
when it's, hey, do you really want that to happen to your brand? You people couldn't check into your hotel. Maybe they'll book, they'll go to the Caesars next time, or maybe they'll go to whatever, Resorts World. And so that's the stuff that makes me nervous about the future.
Rightfully so.
But like you said, hinted at earlier, look, there was a period where a lot of the big IT organizations didn't really focus on OT, and that's why we have like 4 or 5 really great OT solution companies that have made their names out of that. And what is probably good for the consumer is that the big IT companies are now trying to look at like the whole stack, and maybe even talking about partnering here and there. I think the better integration even between OT companies and the IT companies, if they can find a way to cooperate and share revenue somehow, or because that's what the client ends up. And I'm sure for any clients, people who are trying to solve this problem internal to an organization, some of their challenges, they're like, I got so many vendors calling me every day. Like, well, how do I make a choice between, this product's supposed to be the best CTD product out there, continuous threat detection product. But then so-and-so told me that, oh, well, Microsoft does a product that's like a third of the cost. Why don't we use the Microsoft product? And then you talk to an expert and they might go, well, I'm not sure. I haven't really vetted that Microsoft product, but it's hard to argue with 1/3 the price. And similarly, there's a number of other organizations that are, working on it. So I do think from the consumer, maybe it'd be dizzying amount of options still, but the products are getting better and better at what they do, right?
No, I mean, I'm with you on the ransomware stuff. It just continues to become more and more of an issue. The groups are getting a lot more complex and more organized. But again, we do have a lot more tools than we've had in the past. I mean, when you look back even to 2020, there wasn't this much dialogue about industrial cybersecurity. There most definitely wasn't the number of tools and options and solutions as we do now. So those are a lot of good things, or a lot of things to feel good about.
And CISA has helped with that, I think, quite a bit. I think they're, I personally did a bunch of their training just to go like, hey, let me see how they're talking about it. And there was a lot of stuff where I was like, oh, this is really useful that they've created this sort of certification system for just anybody for free to go and find out. So, I mean, even so, young engineers who haven't sort of pivoted over to cyber, I would say, hey, head over to CISA and have a look, CISA, and have a look at their training, their OT training. There's a bunch of stuff that's free. You can get the certifications, stick that on your resume, view it as an opening move. There's other types of training to do, more advanced, like IEC 62443 training and stuff like that. Some of that's can be costly. Maybe you don't work for a company yet, but yeah, to young engineers, there is a lot of options to get the ball rolling. And the good news is once you have some of them, people will take a chance on you. Companies might go, oh, okay, well, at least this person is trying. There's people who show up and go, I got a lot of IT training, but so what kind of training have you done in the OT space? And just crickets, right? They go, well, I was hoping you trained me. Well, okay, that could work for you, but
Yeah.
But better yet, show you're proactive. If you really, if anything of what I said earlier about being like a sort of a project geek and getting like, I like field work and all that stuff appeals to you, that's something to look at. There's so many options online of just free education these days. I mean, I don't know if you turn into the, you sound like the old man on the block when you're like, well, in my day, like the idea that you could just go get training on anything, or even go to YouTube and figure out how to fix your washer dryer, like that stuff didn't exist, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So kind of like same thing, paralysis by options. There's so many things you could learn, but hey, if you get targeted, especially on OT security, there's a lot of stuff out there. So including this podcast, right?
Thanks, Constantine. For more information on the work Schneider Electric is doing on the cyber front, you can check them out under the cybersecurity portion of se.com. And thank you for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Constantine Antoniou, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.